Welcome to Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, for Europe District, our magazine on EU enlargement. Famous for its 24-hour daylight in the summer, Reykjavik is the world's northernmost capital. Iceland knocked on the EU's door following the collapse of its banking sector. That was 4 years ago. Accession negotiations opened in 2010, but as we'll see, the prospect of EU membership remains divisive. While 2/3 of Icelanders welcome the talks, only 1/3 say they would be ready to join at this stage. We'll also tell you more about the role of women on this very progressive and liberal island. And in this land of volcanoes, geysers and hot springs, we'll explore the possibilities of geothermal power. But let's move to our first story. 4 years after Iceland's financial meltdown, the country has made an impressive recovery. The economy is poised to grow by 3% this year. But is the crisis really over? Can Iceland settle its debt dispute with the UK and the Netherlands? Salima Belhaj reports.
Selling ice cream, waiting on customers. This was not Aurelio's dream. He was an architect and he knew all about the go-go 2000s. But in 2008, when the housing bubble burst, Aurelio lost everything.
I bought a house. The loan was 3 times bigger than the loan or the money that I took at the beginning. And basically, I was not able anymore to pay.
October 2008, Iceland began its downward spiral. Local banks speculated on even riskier assets. Their debt amounted to 12 times that of the country's gross national product. Looking back, government officials say they were overconfident.
We were too sure of ourselves. We didn't understand how a small nation must behave in similar conditions. We thought the distances were short enough to do things fast. But a small country must have the same rigor as a large one.
A month later, Icelanders gathered outside Parliament to express their anger, kicking off the revolution of pots and pans, which would result in the government's resignation. Katrin was among the protesters.
We had the pots and pans try to make the noise so they couldn't keep on discussing everything inside the house like everything was okay, because it was not okay. And in the end they gave up and they allowed us to vote.
An election which swept away the old powers and voted in a new leftist coalition. Bankers and politicians had to face the music for their role in causing the economic crisis. Today, Iceland is getting back on its feet, but there remains one elephant in the room, IceSave. A subsidiary of Icelandic bank Landsbanki, it ran savings accounts popular with British and Dutch depositors. When it collapsed in 2008 and was nationalized, the question of repayment turned into a diplomatic crisis. Faced with mounting pressure from London and The Hague, the government passed a debt settlement plan. But in a dramatic turn of events, the president refused to sign the deal and held 2 referendums on the issue, which resulted in a resounding no vote. Despite this opposition, the case has slowly progressed.
The assets of the old bank, they are being used to pay the creditors, which in this case, the priority creditors are the IceSave holders, or basically the governments of Netherlands and the UK, because they paid out to the depositors. So I think it is all in process.
Landsbanki has repaid half of the 8 billion euros owed to the British and Dutch governments, but that's without calculating the interest on the debt. This fall, the European Free Trade Association will render a judgment about IceSave. It could end up being a bitter pill to swallow for Iceland.
And for more on the story, I'm here in Aftanes on the outskirts of the capital. This is the residence of the President of Iceland. A Eurosceptic, Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, won a 5th term in office at the end of June, making him the longest-serving president in the history of Iceland. He has strong views on Europe and on IceSave. He will tell us why. Mr. President, thank you for having us. As we saw in our report, 4 years after Iceland's financial meltdown, your country is going to grow again this year by 3%. How do you explain this surprise recovery?
Well, the success of the Icelandic recovery is also very interesting in the light of what everybody in Europe was saying with respect to the IceSave issue, because they were predicting that if I put the issue to a referendum, Iceland would be isolated financially, we would face economic ruins. Somebody even said we would be the Cuba of the North. nothing of these doomsday scenarios became a reality. On the contrary, the success of the referendum helped to resurrect the Icelandic economy by giving the people back their self-esteem, their self-confidence. So here we are, almost 4 years after the banks crashed, with an Icelandic economy well on its way to recovery, unemployment among the lowest in Europe, and many of the most important sectors in the Icelandic economy paradoxically doing much better now than they were in the years leading up to the crisis.
Iceland's government has applied for EU membership, but you are opposed to the European Union. What is it that you don't like about the EU?
Our neighbor to the west, Greenland, decided to leave the European Union. Our neighbor to the east, Norway, failed twice to get the nation to accept European Union membership. And also, when you look at Northern Europe, and you go from Greenland to across Iceland, over to Britain and Norway and Denmark and Sweden, it's not until you come to Finland that you find a Euro country. In fact, all of Northern Europe has decided to have its own currency. And if you add together our geographical position, as well as how our neighboring countries have opted for a different currency solution, and then you add the control over the fishing grounds, of the natural resources, it has always been my view that it was a better deal for Iceland, giving our geographical position and the nature of natural resources, to remain outside the European Union.
Will you seek to halt accession talks during your next term in office?
No, I have always respected the democratic will of both other institutions in Iceland, like the Parliament, and the right of the Icelandic people to have a final say on this issue. But as I have said many times in Iceland, my friend, the foreign minister, will have a pretty tough task to get outcome of the negotiations that will be approved by the Icelandic people.
Well, as you mentioned, the foreign minister, who is a staunch supporter of EU membership, we'll meet him in the second part of the program. We'll hear his views on the matter. Thank you very much for talking to us. Is Iceland a woman's paradise? This country prides itself of having elected the first woman as president. It was in 1980 with Vigdís Finnbogadóttir. These days, both the government and the Church of Iceland are led by women. With 71% of Icelandic women in employment, the country holds a European record. But is this nation as egalitarian as it seems? Our reporter finds out for us.
Early on, women were given the right to vote in 1915, but it would be a one-day strike in 1975 that brought women's issues to the forefront. Among the protesters that day, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, a French teacher.
They
left work at 1 p.m. asking their boss, "Can I leave for 2 or 3 hours? I'll meet my friends in town." And the result was that they left work and the company was paralyzed. And it was then that they realized that women were the pillars of society.
In 1980, at 50 years old, Vigdís, as she is known to fellow Icelanders, was persuaded to run for president.
I found out later on that some women of my age who didn't vote for me back then, they said, "I would vote for you now." I gave them confidence.
And she did indeed give other women confidence, like Thora Arnarsdóttir. At 37 years old and pregnant with her third child, she left her job as a journalist to enter the presidential race. Her bid reignited the debate about work-family balance.
When Vigdís Finnbogadóttir was elected in 1980, there were one or whether two maybe female women parliamentarians. Now we're up to more than 40%. So things have changed. They change slowly. It's unusual. I was pregnant, had a baby, kept on with the campaign. People were discussing the role of my husband, how I was going to cope.
Thora lost to the incumbent. The media made her into a symbol, young, pretty, with a husband ready to put his ambitions on the back burner to support his wife.
Well, it's not uncommon. It's not that common yet, though. But I know few men that stay at home, who have wives who have careers. For me, that's what makes me a whole man, to be able to do all these things.
The Lutheran Church of Iceland, too, has undergone a revolution after a sex scandal shook its foundations. Many thought the time was right for a woman to lead and elected the church's first female bishop.
If you have a woman that is directing the church now, because of the thinking of the woman, it will change. It's one point of the changing, the thinking of woman.
But it's not all smooth sailing ahead. Only about 19% of senior positions are held by women, and men are still paid 16% more than their female counterparts.
This small building is the old prison of Reykjavik. Iceland is a pretty crime-free and peaceful nation. As the locals put it, it would be silly to rob a bank if there's nowhere to run away with the money. But in recent years, Icelanders have developed a passion for crime novels. Our reporters met with Árni Thorarinsson. His books have been translated into more than 15 languages.
He's made 300,000 readers shiver throughout the world. This former journalist says Iceland discovered crime fiction by chance.
The isolation had broken and we were open to all the possible good and bad influences from the world. And that includes crime and violence and sometimes murders. But in Iceland we have only, in reality, maybe 2 or 3 murders every year.
In 1998, Árni's first thriller, The Night Has a Thousand Eyes, was published. Last year in Iceland, they adapted his 4th book, The Season of the Witch, into a TV series. The public was introduced to his main character, Einar, an investigative journalist who lives in Old Reykjavik.
He lives in this area because I lived once in this area. I know it quite well. And it's also an area where there is a sense of the old Reykjavik, older houses, and in my books I try to bring together the old Iceland and the new one.
By chance or coincidence, if Einar comes from the old town, the victims themselves all live in the new quarters of the capital.
These buildings, this one for example, they are symbols of economic craziness.
The crisis is the theme of his latest thriller, Morning Angel. His first English language translation will be in bookstores this fall.
This spa at Blue Lagoon is one of Iceland's favorite attractions. These lava fields are filled with steamy waters from a nearby geothermal plant. In this country of hot springs and geysers, geothermal power provides most of the country's heating.
Geysers are a common occurrence in Iceland, the land of volcanoes. About every 4 years, there's an eruption on the island. But these hot, bubbling springs are more than a beautiful spectacle of nature. They are also a source of heat to Iceland's inhabitants. Around 80% of Icelandic homes are heated with geothermal energy. The geothermic plant in Hellis Heidi is 43 kilometers away from Reykjavik. The steam, drawn from nearly a kilometer underground, reaches a temperature of around 300 degrees Celsius. A series of pipes captures and carries the hot water to houses in the city, like Haraldar's.
It's about 80 centigrade hot, so you can burn the shower if you are not careful. And it's also in the shower, so I can stay in the shower the whole day.
Geothermal energy has also allowed Haraldar to indulge his passion for gardening, heating his small greenhouse. Just a few kilometers away, a much bigger greenhouse is in use at the Agriculture University. It houses a Mediterranean climate 500 kilometers from the Arctic Circle. With the greenhouses, Iceland produces 70% of its own tomatoes. The most surprising food grown here?
The bananas take up about 600 or 700 square meters. So I've been told that this is the biggest banana plantation in Europe. They get to mature on the plant the whole time. So the taste of the bananas gets so much sweeter than when they've been cut green and transported across the globe. So we actually love these bananas. I usually warn people, please don't taste them unless you are prepared to never like other bananas.
Unlike the country's tomatoes, which there are plans to export, the bananas are just for show.
This is Geysir, home to the star of Iceland's geysers. It looks quite surreal, like so many places in Iceland. We'll be back after the news break and we'll continue our journey across Iceland.